Freedom. The word had echoed through every moment of his existence, a drumbeat that matched the rhythm of his heart. Freedom from the walls, freedom from the titans, freedom from the cycle of hatred that had consumed his people for 100 years. Eren Yeager had chased that word through blood and ash, through the bodies of his enemies and the screams of those he loved. He had seen the future, all possible futures, branching like the roots of Yggdrasil through time itself, and in every one of them he had seen chains. Chains of flesh, chains of fate, chains of an endless, grinding wheel that crushed humanity beneath its weight. He had broken those chains. He had activated the rumbling, felt the colossal footsteps of millions shake the earth, felt the power of the founding titan surge through every cell of his body. He had become a devil, a monster, the enemy of all the world, because someone had to be willing to bear that burden. Someone had to be free enough to damn themselves so that others might live. But freedom, he had learned, was never clean. It was soaked in blood and wrapped in the screams of the dying. Now, in this moment between moments, suspended in a void that was neither light nor dark, neither hot nor cold, Eren felt something else. Something vast and terrible and utterly alien pressing against the boundaries of his consciousness. The paths, that infinite plane where all Eldians connected, where the Founder's power resided, were fragmenting around him, reality itself tearing like wet paper. What is this? The attacked Titan's memories surged through him, but they showed him nothing. No future, no past, only a present that was collapsing into something else entirely. He saw flashes, impossible images that his mind struggled to comprehend. Worlds burning beneath suns that should not exist. Cities the size of continents. War on a scale that made even the rumbling look like a skirmish between children. And he heard voices, thousands of them, millions, screaming in languages he did not know, crying out to gods he had never heard of, dying in wars that had raged for 10,000 years. 10,000 years of war. The thought should have been impossible, incomprehensible, yet somehow Eren knew it was true. Just as he had known the future, he now knew this. He was being pulled toward something vast and terrible, a universe where war was not an aberration but the natural state of existence, where the entire species he had fought to save would be less than a footnote in an empire so large it defied imagination. His body, if he still had a body, convulsed with pain. The Titan shifter curse that had defined his existence for so long was reacting to this transition, changing, adapting, screaming in protest. Flesh that could regenerate from any wound, steam that billowed from his body with each transformation, the power to command legions of walking nightmares. All of it was being forced through a crucible he did not understand. I won't let it control me, he thought, even as consciousness began to slip away. I won't be anyone's slave, not the king's, not Zeke's, not Fate's, and not whatever the hell is waiting for me on the other side. The void around him began to solidify, reality reasserting itself in ways that felt fundamentally wrong. Gravity returned with crushing force. Light blazed across his vision, not the warm light of the sun, but something harsh and red and angry. Sound crashed over him like a wave, the roar of engines, the scream of weapons, the thunder of distant explosions. Eren Yeager opened his eyes to a new world, and the new world opened its eyes to him. In the darkness between stars, something ancient and terrible took notice. Four powers that had existed since before time began turned their attention toward this anomaly, this fragment of a different reality that had somehow pierced the veil and entered their domain. They did not understand it, not yet, but they recognized potential when they saw it. Potential for change, for chaos, for war. The Imperium of man, that vast and decaying edifice of 1,000,000 worlds, did not yet know that something impossible had entered its borders. The Inquisition's psychic sensors had not detected the breach. The Astronomican's light had not flickered. For one brief moment, Eren Yeager existed in the Warhammer 40,000 universe unobserved and unknown. It would be the last moment of peace he would ever know again. The first thing Eren registered was pain. Not the clean pain of a wound or the sharp agony of broken bones. Pain he had learned to endure, even welcome, as the price of transformation. This was different. This was the sensation of every atom in his body being pulled apart and slammed back together in configurations that shouldn't exist. His nervous system was on fire, synapses misfiring as they tried to process sensory input from a reality that operated under fundamentally different rules. He was falling. No, he had already fallen. Eren's eyes snapped open, and he immediately regretted it. The sky above him was wrong. Not the clear blue he remembered from parodies, nor even the gray overcast of Liberio. This sky was a sickly yellow-green, choked with clouds that roiled and churned like living things. Ash fell in thick sheets, and the air itself tasted of sulfur and burning metal. He tried to move and discovered he was partially buried in rubble. Concrete. At least, he thought it was concrete, though it was darker and more dense than any building material he'd seen, pinned his left leg. His right arm was free and he raised it to his face, checking for damage. The skin was there, unmarked, but the sleeve of his jacket was gone, burned away. In fact, most of his clothes were in tatters, and steam was rising from his exposed skin in thick billows. The regeneration is already working, he realized. How badly was I hurt when I arrived? Gritting his teeth, Eren planted his free hand against the ground and pushed, simultaneously pulling his leg from beneath the rubble. The concrete crumbled at his touch, not from any particular strength, but because it had been weakened by whatever catastrophe had struck this place. As he freed himself and stood, he finally got a proper look at his surroundings. Devastation. That was the only word for it. He stood in what had once been a city, but calling it such now would have been generous. Massive structures, buildings that dwarfed anything from his world, some easily 100 stories tall, lay toppled like children's blocks. Fires burned everywhere, and the ground itself was scorched and cratered. In the distance, he could see the skeletal remains of something that might have been a factory, its twisted metal framework still glowing red-hot. But it was the scale that made Eren's breath catch in his throat. The sheer, impossible scale. The buildings weren't just tall, they were monolithic, Gothic in their architecture, covered in sculptures and inscriptions that seemed to serve no practical purpose. Even in ruins, they spoke of a civilization that built not just for function, but for overwhelming grandeur. Where the hell am I? He took a step forward, testing his leg. It held his weight without issue. Whatever injuries he'd sustained in the transition had already healed. Good. He would need every advantage he could get in this place. A sound made him freeze. It was mechanical, the grinding of gears and the whine of servos, but there was something organic about it too, like a beast growling beneath the metal. Eren's combat instincts, honed through years of fighting titans and human soldiers alike, screamed danger. He dropped into a crouch behind a fallen pillar, peering around its edge toward the source of the noise. What he saw made no sense. A machine was approaching through the ruins, but calling it a machine seemed inadequate. It moved on tracked wheels, each easily twice his height, and its body was a mass of armor plating covered in symbols and inscriptions. A massive gun, if something that large could be called a gun, jutted from its front, and smaller weapons bristled from every surface. But it was the decorations that disturbed him most. Skulls, hundreds of them, attached to chains that hung from the machine's flanks. Some looked human, others definitely weren't. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, more shapes moved through the ashfall. Humanoid shapes, but too large, too broad. They wore armor the color of dried blood, and each one carried weapons that looked like they could punch holes through the armored titan. As they drew closer, Eren could make out more details through the haze, and what he saw made his blood run cold. They were soldiers, but if these were soldiers, then they were built for a kind of war he couldn't imagine. Each one stood at least 8 feet tall, their armor sculpted to resemble muscled anatomy, with massive pauldrons bearing more of those strange symbols. Their helmets were works of brutal artistry, with glowing red-eye lenses that swept across the ruins in precise, methodical patterns. Searching, Eren realized. They're searching for something. For me. No, that didn't make sense. He'd just arrived, unless his entrance had been more dramatic than he'd thought. He glanced down at the crater he'd woken up in, seeing for the first time the way the rubble had been blasted outward in a perfect circle. The ground itself melted into glass at the center. Shit. One of the soldiers stopped, its helmeted head tilting toward Eren's hiding place. For a moment, neither moved. Then the soldier raised its weapon, a massive rifle covered in purity seals and inscriptions, and spoke in a voice that was barely human, distorted by mechanical augmentation. Anomaly detected. Grid reference Sigma 77. Unknown life sign. Recommend immediate termination. The words were Gothic low, a language Eren shouldn't have understood. But somehow, impossibly, the meaning translated itself in his mind, as if the universe was bending to allow communication. Before he could process this, before he could decide whether to fight or flee, the soldier opened fire. The sound was deafening. Not the crack of thunder spears or even the boom of Marleyan artillery, but something deeper, a bass roar that Eren felt in his bones. The pillar he'd been hiding behind exploded, and he threw himself to the side on pure instinct, rolling behind another piece of cover. They're shooting at me. They're actually shooting at me. More voices crackled through the air, that same distorted mechanical speech. Target mobile. Enhanced reflexes confirmed. Assessing threat level. Be wary, brothers. The augury detected a massive warp disturbance at these coordinates. This may be no ordinary heretic. Then we shall purge it with fire and faith, for the Emperor. Emperor, brothers. Eren's mind raced even as his body moved. He couldn't stay pinned down like this. He needed information, needed to understand what the hell was happening, but first, he needed to survive. Another burst of gunfire tore through his cover, and this time, Eren felt something punch through his side. The impact spun him around and he hit the ground hard, gasping. His hand went to the wound automatically and found nothing. Steam billowed from where the bullet had hit him, and through the tattered remains of his shirt he could see flesh knitting back together in real time. The soldiers saw it too. Their formation shifted, weapons all training on him now, and the one who'd spoken first took a step forward. Impossible. The target regenerates. This is no ordinary mutant. Sorcery, another hissed, and there was genuine fear in that mechanical voice. The creature employs the warp. Call for the chaplain. We face a servant of the dark gods. Eren didn't understand half of what they were saying, but he understood the tone. He'd heard it before in the voices of Marleyan speaking about Eldians. Fear mixed with hatred and disgust. The tone of people who saw him as less than human, as something that needed to be destroyed. Something inside him snapped. He was tired of being hunted, tired of being seen as a monster, tired of everyone trying to take his freedom away. These soldiers, whoever they were, whatever this place was, they were just like all the others. They saw something they didn't understand, and their first instinct was to kill it. Fine. Eren stood, ignoring the weapons pointed at him, ignoring the continued gunfire that tore through his body only to be healed in seconds. Steam erupted from his wounds in great gouts, obscuring him from view. He brought his hand to his mouth, and even through the pain and confusion and rage, the motion was automatic, ingrained by years of practice. He bit down. Lightning split the sickly sky. The transformation was instantaneous. Flesh and bone erupted from Eren's body, expanding outward in a massive explosion of steam and energy that sent the soldiers staggering back. In the space of a heartbeat, where a young man had stood, there now loomed a 15-meter titan, its body all muscle and sinew, marked with that distinctive skeletal appearance that characterized the attacked titan. Eren's consciousness settled into the nape of the titan's neck, looking out through its eyes at the soldiers below. Through the titan's enhanced senses, he could see their reactions, the way they'd immediately fallen into defensive positions, the way their weapons were already adjusting to target him. But he could also see something else: hesitation. These warriors, clearly veterans of countless battles, had never seen anything like him before. Good. The titan's hand shot out, faster than anything its size should have been able to move, and grabbed the nearest soldier. The armored warrior tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Eren was already squeezing. He expected the armor to crumple, expected to feel bones break and flesh pulp like every other human he'd ever crushed. The armor held. Eren's eyes widened in his tightened form. The soldier in his grip was struggling, but the armor, whatever it was made of, wasn't giving way. He could feel incredible strength pushing back against his grip, and when the soldier drove an armored fist into his Titan's palm, the impact actually hurt. What the hell are these things? Armor integrity at 87%, the soldier in his grip reported calmly, as if being held by a Titan was merely an inconvenience. The creature possesses strength equivalent to a lesser Ogren. Recommend heavy weapons. The tank-like machine roared to life, its massive cannon swiveling to point directly at Eren. He had less than a second to react, and instinct took over. He hurled the soldier in his hand at the machine and threw himself to the side, using the Titan's agility to vault over a ruined building. The cannon fired. The shell hit where Eren had been standing a moment before, and the entire city block ceased to exist. The explosion was so massive, so utterly devastating that for a moment, Eren's mind went blank trying to process it. That single shot had vaporized more material than all of Paradis' thunder spears combined, and they had aimed it at him without hesitation. He landed hard, the Titan's feet cracking pavement, and immediately started running. More gunfire pursued him, explosive rounds that tore chunks from his Titan's body even as steam regenerated the damage. He could hear them coordinating behind him, their mechanical voices unnaturally calm as they called for reinforcements, triangulated his position, requested orbital support. Orbital. Eren didn't have time to wonder what that meant. He needed to get away from these soldiers, needed to find somewhere to hide and figure out what the hell was going on. The Titan was fast, could cover ground in massive leaping bounds, but this city, if you could call ruins a city, seemed to go on forever. And then he saw it. In the distance, rising above the devastation like a tombstone, was a structure that dwarfed everything else. It was a cathedral, but one built on a scale that made Eren's mind rebel against the dimensions. Its spires reached into the poisoned sky like the fingers of a corpse, and its walls were covered in more of those symbols, aquilas. He would later learn they were called. Double-headed eagles that represented the Imperium of man. Something about that building called to him. Maybe it was the promise of cover, of walls thick enough to provide actual protection. Maybe it was just instinct, the same instinct that had guided him through countless battles. He ran toward it, the Titan's footsteps shaking the ground, steam trailing behind him like a comet's tail. Behind him, the soldiers didn't pursue. They couldn't match his speed. Instead, their leader spoke into a communications device built into his armor, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "This is Brother Sergeant Thaddeus of the Blood Raven's 3rd Company. We have engaged an unknown Xenos or demonic entity in the ruins of Hive Tertius. Entity displays regenerative capabilities, immense physical strength, and rapid transformation abilities. Requesting immediate support from the Librarius and orders from Captain Angelos." A pause, then a different voice, older and harder, crackled through the vox. "The Librarians detected the warp disturbance 17 minutes ago, Sergeant. They describe it as unlike anything in recorded history, a fusion of biological and psychic energy that follows no known pattern. The creature you have engaged may be a weapon of the ruinous powers or a new Xenos threat. Either way, it must not be allowed to escape. The Inquisition has already been notified." "Understood, Captain, we will." "You will observe and contain," the voice interrupted. "Do not kill it if it can be avoided. The Inquisition wants it alive for interrogation. If that proves impossible, then purge it with extreme prejudice." "The Emperor protects, Sergeant." "The Emperor protects," Thaddeus repeated, though something in his voice suggested doubt. As he watched the Titan disappear into the ruins, Brother Sergeant Thaddeus wondered what exactly they had found. In 3 centuries of service to the Blood Ravens, he had fought orcs and Eldar, tyrannids and heretics, demons and renegades. He had seen things that would break a normal man's mind, had witnessed the galaxy's infinite capacity for horror. But this was something new. And in the 41st millennium, new was never good. Eren crashed through the cathedral's massive doors, his titan form barely fitting through the opening despite its enormous size. Inside, the space was even more vast than he'd anticipated. A single chamber that could have held the entire population of Shiganshina district with room to spare. Columns the width of houses rose into shadows above, and between them hung banners so old they were falling apart, covered in more of those symbols. He let the titan collapse, steam erupting as the flesh dissolved around him. Eren dropped to the stone floor, naked and gasping, his own clothes having been destroyed in the transformation. For a moment, he just lay there trying to catch his breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He'd been shot, multiple times. Bullets that should have killed him had been shrugged off by his regeneration, but the sheer power behind those weapons, he'd felt it. Those soldiers, whatever they were, had been holding back. They could have killed him if they'd wanted to. They wanted me alive. The thought was disturbing. Eren had learned to be wary of anyone who wanted to capture rather than kill him. It usually meant they had plans, schemes, ways to use him that would strip away what little agency he had left. He pushed himself to his feet, looking around the cathedral for anything he could use as clothes. His eyes had adjusted to the dim light filtering through shattered stained glass windows, and what he saw made him pause. The windows, even broken, told a story. Images of war, of battles on a scale he couldn't comprehend. Cities burning, worlds cracking apart. And at the center of every image, a figure in golden armor, radiating light. The Emperor he would learn, the immortal master of mankind, the corpse god who sat upon the golden throne and whose will guided the Imperium across 1,000,000 worlds. But Eren didn't know that yet. All he knew was that whoever these people worshipped, they worshipped with a fervor that made Marley's propaganda look tame. He found a banner that had fallen from one of the columns, torn but still mostly intact. The fabric was heavy, woven with threads that felt almost metallic. He wrapped it around himself like a toga, tying it at his shoulder. It would have to do. Now he needed answers. Eren walked deeper into the cathedral, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The place felt dead, abandoned. Whatever war had destroyed the city outside had clearly reached here too. Pews lay shattered and scorch marks blackened the walls, but there was something else, a sense of presence, like he was being watched. His hand moved to his mouth instinctively, ready to bite and transform if necessary. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, boy." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the cathedral like the voice of the building itself. Eren spun, trying to locate the source, but saw nothing. "Who are you?" He called out, "Show yourself." A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the cathedral, and as it approached, Eren felt his breath catch. It was a woman, but calling her merely human would have been inaccurate. She wore armor even more elaborate than the soldiers outside, but hers was white and gold, covered in purity seals and holy symbols. Her face was beautiful in a harsh, angular way, and her eyes blazed with fanatical intensity. In her hands, she carried a weapon that looked like a fusion of a sword and a chainsaw, its teeth still slick with blood. "I am Sister Superior Miriam of the Order of Our Martyred Lady," she said, her voice hard as iron. "And you, abomination, are under arrest by decree of the Holy Inquisition. Surrender, and your death will be swift. Resist, and I promise you will beg for the Emperor's mercy before the end." Eren's jaw tightened, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "I don't know who you are," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't know where I am or what the hell is happening. But I do know one thing, I'm not surrendering to anyone. Not now, not ever." Sister Miriam's expression didn't change, but Eren saw her grip on her weapon tight. "Then may the Emperor have mercy on your soul," she said, "because I will have none." She charged, and Eren brought his hand to his mouth once more, lightning already crackling in the air around him. The battle for understanding had just begun, But in the darkness between the Imperium and the warp, four powers smiled. They had felt the lightning, tasted the transformation, and recognized something they could use. The great game had found a new piece. And Eren Yeager, who had fought so hard for freedom in his own world, was about to discover that in the 41st millennium, freedom was the cruelest lie of all. The transformation completed in a blaze of light and fury, but this time, Eren kept control. He manifested the attack titan at only 10 meters, smaller, more maneuverable in the confined space of the cathedral. Steam billowed around the titan form as Sister Miriam closed the distance, her chainsword revving to maximum speed, the blessed teeth glowing with a faint blue light. She was fast, impossibly fast for someone in full armor. She covered the 20 meters between them in less than 2 seconds, and her chainsword came down in an arc that would have bisected a normal titan from shoulder to hip. Eren's titan form caught the blade between its hands. The chainsword screamed, its teeth grinding against the titan's regenerating flesh, digging deeper even as new tissue formed to push them out. Blood and steam sprayed everywhere, but Eren held on, his titan's face contorted in a snarl of effort and rage. Sister Miriam's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise she allowed herself. This creature, this abomination, possessed strength beyond what her briefing had suggested. The fact that it could catch her power weapon, blessed by the cardinals themselves and anointed with oils sanctified on holy terra, spoke of either incredible fortitude or dark sorcery. Probably both. You dare lay hands upon a weapon blessed by the God Emperor himself. She hissed and activated the disruption field built into her armor's gauntlet. Electricity arced through the chainsword and into Eren's titan form. The pain was immediate and agonizing, worse than any wound he'd ever suffered. It wasn't just physical. There was something else in that energy, something that felt like it was trying to burn away his very existence. He roared, the sound shaking dust from the cathedral's rafters, and threw Sister Miriam away with all his strength. She flew backward, hit a pillar hard enough to crack the stone, but was on her feet again before Eren could press the advantage. Her armor's servo motors whined as they absorbed the impact, and her expression remained one of cold determination. "Your resistance only proves your corruption," she declared, raising a bolt pistol in her free hand. "The righteous feel no pain when touched by the Emperor's light. You are tainted, creature, tainted by the warp or by Xeno's influence. Either way, you are an affront to all that is holy." The bolt pistol barked once, twice, 3 times. The rounds were massive, 75 caliber mass-reactive shells that exploded on impact. They hit Eren's titan in the chest and detonated, blowing fist-sized chunks out of its torso. Steam erupted from the wounds as they began to close, but these healed slower than the bullets from the soldiers outside. "Those bullets are different," Eren realized through the pain. "Blessed," she said. "Whatever that means, they hurt more. He couldn't win this fight. Not here, not like this." Sister Miriam was clearly a veteran warrior, enhanced by technology he didn't understand and armed with weapons designed to kill things far more dangerous than a 15-meter titan. Every instinct Eren had, every lesson learned in years of combat, told him he needed to retreat. But retreat to where? The titan's hand smashed down, not at Sister Miriam, but at the floor between them. The ancient stone shattered, and Eren was already moving, his titan form leaping through the cloud of debris toward the rear of the cathedral. He saw an archway there, leading deeper into the structure. If he could just get some distance, find somewhere to hide and let the transformation dissipate. Sister Miriam's voice boomed through the cathedral, amplified by speakers built into her armor. "Sisters, the abomination flees, cut off its escape." From hidden alcoves throughout the cathedral, more armored figures emerged. These wore simpler armor than Sister Miriam, but no less deadly. Each carried a bolter, those massive Baroque weapons that Eren had already learned to fear, and their faces were hidden behind helmets marked with the fleur-de-lis symbol of the Adepta Sororitas. The Sisters of Battle had been waiting for him. It was a trap. The entire cathedral had been a trap. Eren's titan form skidded to a halt, as bolter fire erupted from all directions. The shells tore into his Titan, explosions blossoming across its body faster than steam could repair the damage. He raised his arms to protect the nape, the critical weak point, and felt rounds detonate against his forearms, against his shoulders, against his sides. They know, he realized with growing horror. Somehow, they know about the weak point. Through the Titan's fading vision, Eren saw Sister Miriam approaching, her chainsword held at the ready. Behind her, more figures entered the cathedral, these even larger than the soldiers from before, wearing armor the color of bone and carrying weapons that crackled with power fields. "Stand down, Sister Superior," one of them commanded, his voice a deep bass rumble that cut through even the sound of gunfire. "The Inquisitor wants it alive." "But it is an abomination, Brother Captain," Miriam protested, but she lowered her weapon. "To allow it to live is to risk contamination. The Inquisitor's orders are clear. We extract it, contain it, and let the Ordo Xenos determine what manner of creature it is. If it proves too dangerous, we can always destroy it later." The Titan was dying. Eren could feel its form breaking down, not from the accumulated damage but from exhaustion. He'd pushed the transformation too hard, too fast after the trauma of arriving in this universe. His stamina was failing. As the flesh began to evaporate around him, Eren made his decision. He couldn't fight his way out, not against this many enemies, not in his current state. But he wouldn't go down unconscious and helpless either. The Titan's body dissolved in a final surge of steam, and Eren emerged from the nape, landing on his feet despite his exhaustion. The makeshift banner toga he'd wrapped around himself was gone, destroyed in the transformation, but he barely noticed. His eyes swept across the assembled warriors, 20 sisters of battle, 5 of those massive space marines, and Sister Miriam herself. All of them had weapons pointed at him. "I am Eren Yeager," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I don't know how I got here. I don't know what your Imperium is or why you're trying to kill me, but I won't be anyone's prisoner. I've had enough of people trying to control me, trying to use me as a weapon. So if you're going to kill me, do it. But know that I'll take as many of you with me as I can." The space marine who'd spoken before, the brother captain, tilted his helmeted head slightly, as if seeing Eren for the first time. "You speak Gothic," he observed. "Impossible. The Auspex readings indicated you arrived on this world less than 1 hour ago. No human, no matter how gifted, could learn a language in such a short time." "I don't know what you're talking about," Eren replied. "I'm speaking the only language I know." "Curious," another voice said, this one coming from behind the space marines. The warriors parted and a new figure stepped forward. This one wore robes instead of armor, deep black and embroidered with silver thread that formed symbols Eren's eyes couldn't quite focus on. The man, if it was a man, was ancient, his face a web of scars and augmetic implants. A mechanical eye glowed red where his left eye should have been, and his right hand had been replaced with something that looked more like a complex tool than a prosthetic. "I'm Inquisitor Karth of the Ordo Xenos," the man said, his voice soft but carrying absolute authority. "And you, Eren Yeager, are the most fascinating anomaly I have encountered in 73 years of service to the Emperor. You arrive on a dead world in a blaze of warp energy that follows no known pattern. You transform into a creature of flesh and steam that defies all biological classification. You regenerate from wounds that would kill a space marine, and you speak Gothic despite claiming ignorance of our language." He stepped closer, ignoring the way Eren tensed, ready to fight despite his exhaustion. "You are either the most elaborate deception the ruinous powers have ever crafted," Inquisitor Karth continued, "or you are proof that the galaxy is far stranger than even the Inquisition has imagined. Either way, you will come with us. You will be studied, examined, and questioned. And if you cooperate, if you prove yourself untainted by chaos, then perhaps you will live. And if I don't cooperate?" Eren asked, though he already knew the answer. Inquisitor Karth smiled, and it was the coldest thing Eren had ever seen. "Then Sister Miriam will be allowed to finish what she started, And believe me, young man, you do not want that. The Sisterhood has methods for dealing with uncooperative subjects that make death look merciful. Eren looked around at the assembled warriors, weighing his options. He was exhausted, naked, surrounded, and had no idea where he was or how to escape. Every practical instinct told him to surrender, to conserve his strength and wait for a better opportunity. But surrendering went against everything he was, everything he'd fought for. His hand started to move toward his mouth. The world exploded in pain. Something had hit him. He didn't even see it coming. His body seized up, every muscle locking in agony, and he collapsed to the floor, convulsing. Through the haze of pain, he saw Inquisitor Karth lower a small device, something that looked like a pistol but clearly wasn't. Neural disruptor, the Inquisitor explained conversationally, as if he hadn't just dropped Eren like a puppet with cut strings. Quite effective on anything with a nervous system. The pain you're feeling is every nerve in your body firing simultaneously. Unpleasant, but non-lethal. And before you think about transforming to escape it, I should mention that 3 of Brother Captain Thaddeus's men have their weapons trained on you with armor-piercing rounds. Your regeneration is impressive, but can it heal from having your brain stem vaporized? Eren couldn't answer, could barely think through the pain, but he understood the message: resist and die. Good, Inquisitor Karth said, reading the surrender in Eren's eyes. Sister Miriam, bind him. Use the warp null manacles. If he is tainted by chaos, they will suppress his abilities. If he's not, the Inquisitor shrugged. Well, then we'll have learned something interesting. Cold metal closed around Eren's wrists, and immediately he felt wrong. It was subtle at first, like a headache forming at the base of his skull, but it grew rapidly into something worse. The connection he'd always felt to the attack titan, the presence that had lived in the back of his mind since the day he inherited the power, began to fade. Panic seized him. He thrashed, tried to bring his hands to his mouth, tried to force a transformation through sheer will. Nothing happened. Fascinating, Inquisitor Karth murmured, watching Eren's failed attempts with clinical interest. The manacles suppress his abilities completely. That confirms my hypothesis. Whatever power he possesses, it operates partially in the warp. Not chaos necessarily, but definitely Psyker adjacent. Psyker, Brother Captain Thaddeus stepped forward, his posture radiating new hostility. If this creature is an unsanctioned Psyker, Inquisitor, then protocol demands immediate. I am aware of the protocol, Brother Captain, Karth interrupted. But this is not a typical unsanctioned Psyker. Look at him. No signs of corruption, no demon binding, no manifestation of the typical warp phenomena. Whatever he is, he's new, and new discoveries require new approaches. The risk is mine to take, the Inquisitor snapped. By authority of the Holy Ordos, I am commandeering this prisoner. Your chapter will be compensated, and your cooperation noted in my report to the Lords of Terra. But Eren Yeager is coming with me. Is that clear? There was a long moment where Eren thought the Space Marine might refuse, might decide that killing a potential threat was worth defying an Inquisitor. But finally, Thaddeus nodded. As you command, Inquisitor, but I am assigning 2 of my men to accompany you. The threat this creature poses is too great to leave to non-Astartes security. Acceptable, Karth agreed. Sister Superior, you may stand down. Your sisters performed admirably. Miriam looked like she wanted to argue, but she too recognized the weight of an Inquisitor's authority. She sheathed her chainsword with clear reluctance. The Emperor protects, she said, though her tone suggested she thought the Emperor would be doing a lot more protecting if they just killed Eren and were done with it. Hands grabbed Eren, massive power-armored hands that lifted him like he weighed nothing. One of the Space Marines produced a robe from somewhere and threw it over him, at least granting him some modesty. Then they were moving, carrying him through the cathedral and out into the poisoned air of the dead city. A ship waited there, if it could be called a ship. It was huge, a flying fortress covered in guns and armor, its hull painted in the same red as the Space Marine's armor. The Blood Raven's colors, though Eren didn't know that yet. As they carried him up the boarding ramp, Eren caught one last glimpse of the city. Fire still burned in the distance, and ash still fell from that sickly sky. This world was dying, or maybe already dead, and somehow he had been thrown into the middle of it. The ramp closed behind them, cutting off his view. Interior lighting, harsh and red, illuminated a corridor that seemed designed to dwarf normal humans. Everything here was built on a scale meant to intimidate, to remind anyone who saw it that they were small and insignificant compared to the might of the Imperium. They took him deep into the ship, through corridors that all looked the same, past servitors, half-human machines that made Eren's stomach turn, and tech priests who paused in their work to watch him pass with mechanical eyes. Finally, they reached a cell. Not a cage, but an actual cell with walls thick enough to withstand explosive decompression and a door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. They threw him inside. The door slammed shut with a sound of terrible finality, and Eren was alone. He sat there in the darkness. They hadn't even given him lights and tried to process everything that had happened. Less than 2 hours ago, he'd been in his own world fighting his own war. Now he was here, wherever here was, a prisoner of people who spoke of emperors and chaos and psychers like they were normal things. His hands went to the manacles around his wrists. They were heavy, cold, and felt like they were drinking something from him. His strength, his will, the connection to the Titan power that had defined him for so long. I need to get these off, he thought. I need to understand what's happening. I need to find a way home. But deep down, in a part of his mind he didn't want to acknowledge, Eren wondered if there was a way home. The transition had felt so final, so complete. Like reality itself had torn and spat him into this new hell. And if this was hell, he had no idea how to fight his way out of it. Time passed. Hours, maybe. It was impossible to tell in the darkness. Eventually, Eren's exhaustion caught up with him. And despite everything, despite the fear and confusion and anger, he slept. He dreamed of paths, of the infinite plane where all Eldians connected, where past and future merged into a single eternal present. But the paths were wrong now, fragmented and chaotic, and at the edges of his vision he saw things that shouldn't exist. Shapes in the darkness, eyes without faces, whispers in languages that hurt to hear. And through it all, a voice, vast and terrible and utterly mad. Freedom, you say? Oh, little mortal, how delicious. In this universe, freedom is the greatest lie ever told. But if you wish, I can show you a different kind of freedom. The freedom of excess, the freedom of perfection, the freedom of change itself. Who are you? Eren demanded in the dream. We are Legion, little mortal. We are the powers that move in the warp. We are the gods your new captors fear above all else. And you are so very interesting. Eren woke with a gasp, his heart hammering. The cell was still dark, still silent. But he could have sworn, just for a moment, that he heard laughter echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. Outside his cell, Inquisitor Karth reviewed the preliminary scans with growing fascination. The creature calling itself Eren Yeager was human, or at least baseline human in genetic structure, but there were anomalies in his physiology that defied explanation. His cells regenerated at a rate that should have been impossible without either extreme mutation or warp taint, yet showed no signs of chaos corruption. His body contained trace elements that didn't exist in any known part of the galaxy, isotopes that suggested he'd come from somewhere with fundamentally different stellar formation patterns. And his brain was fascinating. The neural patterns showed evidence of memories that shouldn't fit in a human mind, as if he'd lived multiple lifetimes, experienced events from perspectives other than his own. What are you? Karth whispered, staring at the data. Where did you come from, Eren Yeager? He would find out. The Inquisition always found out eventually, even if it took years, even if it drove the subject mad in the process. The pursuit of knowledge, after all, was one of the few truly sacred things in the Imperium. That and the eradication of anything that threatened humanity's survival. Eren Yeager was either a threat or a tool. Inquisitor Karth would determine which and then act accordingly. The Emperor protects, after all, and the Inquisition was the Emperor's mercy. They came for him when Eren had lost all track of time. The door to his cell opened with a hiss of hydraulics, and harsh light flooded in, making him squint. 2 space marines entered, not the same ones who'd captured him, but equally imposing. Their armor was midnight blue rather than blood red, and they moved with mechanical precision that suggested they were evaluating threat levels with every step. "On your feet, prisoner," one of them commanded. "The Inquisitor will see you now." Eren stood slowly, his muscles stiff from lack of use. The manacles on his wrists seemed heavier than before, the drain on his strength more pronounced. He wondered if they were tightening their suppression, or if he was simply getting weaker. They led him through the ship again, this time to a different section. The corridors here were slightly less austere, though no less imposing. He passed windows that looked out onto the void, and for the first time, Eren saw stars. But these weren't the stars he knew. The constellations were all wrong alien patterns that drove home just how far from home he really was. The interrogation chamber was exactly what he'd expected. A bare metal room with a single chair, this one equipped with heavy restraints and a table. Inquisitor Karth waited there, his augmented face impassive. Behind him stood 2 figures Eren hadn't seen before. One was a tech priest, it's his, her. Body more machine than human, mechadendrites writhing like serpents from its back. The other was a woman in a severe gray uniform, her face pale and her eyes were wrong. They glowed faintly, and when she looked at Eren, he felt like she was staring through him rather than at him. "Sit," Karth instructed. The space marines forced Eren into the chair and locked the restraints. He didn't resist. What would be the point? "Let us begin with simple questions," the Inquisitor said, settling into a chair across from Eren. "What is your name?" "You already know my name, I told you." "Humor me." "Eren Yeager." "And where are you from, Eren Yeager?" "Paradise Island, or," he paused, remembering the world beyond the walls. "Eldia, or Marley technically, since I was born in a camp, it's complicated." Karth's mechanical I-word, focusing intently on Eren's face. "These places, Paradise, Eldia, Marley, they exist on which world, in which system, under which segmentum's authority?" "I don't know what any of those words mean." "The woman behind me," Karth gestured without looking, "is Psyker Lorraine. She is telepathically monitoring this conversation. If you lie, she will know. If you attempt to deceive us, she will know. Do you understand?" Eren glanced at the glowing-eyed woman, then back to Karth. "I understand, but I'm not lying. I really don't know what you're talking about." "Truth," Psyker Lorraine confirmed, her voice oddly hollow. "He believes what he says." "Interesting." Karth leaned forward. "Then let me ask you this. Do you know what the Imperium of Man is?" "No." "Do you know what the Emperor is?" "No." "Some kind of ruler, I assume, based on the title." "Have you ever heard of the warp, of chaos, of the great enemy?" "No to all of it." Each answer seemed to make the Inquisitor more intrigued rather than less. "And yet you speak perfect Gothic. You understand every word I say, despite claiming to be from a world we have no record of. How do you explain that?" "I can't," Eren admitted. "When I woke up here, everyone was speaking a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood it. And when I speak it, translates, I guess. I hear myself speaking my language, but you hear yours." "Fascinating," Karth murmured. He looked at the tech priest. "Magos Velt analysis." The tech priest's mechanical voice crackled through speakers built into its throat. "The linguistic anomaly suggests either advanced xenotech translation matrices or a naturally occurring warp phenomenon. Given subject Yeager's demonstrated abilities, I hypothesize a psychic mechanism, perhaps unconscious telepathy that bypasses linguistic barriers by transmitting concepts directly." "But you detected no psychic signature during your scans," Karth pointed out. "Negative. However, subject Yeager's abilities do not conform to any known classification. He may represent an entirely new form of Psyker manifestation." Eren had been listening to this exchange with growing frustration. "I'm not a Psyker, whatever that is, And I'm not using telepathy, I'm just talking. You transform into a 15-meter creature of flesh and steam, Karth replied flatly. You regenerate from wounds that would kill a normal human. And you do all of this without any technological assistance, without any gene seed modifications, and without any apparent connection to the warp. You are, by definition, something beyond human baseline. The question is, what kind of something? I'm a Titan shifter, Eren said. I have the attack Titan and the founding Titan. It's the power of the Titans. All Eldians have the potential for it, but only 9 people at any given time actually possess the 9 Titans. Silence greeted this explanation. Psyker Lorraine, Karth prompted. Truth, she confirmed. He believes every word. These Titans, Karth continued, his interest clearly piqued. Are they demons, Xenos, some form of corrupted human? I don't know how to explain it in your terms. Eren struggled for words. About 2,000 years ago, a woman named Ymir Fritz gained the power of the Titans. When she died, her power was split among her descendants, the Eldians. Most Eldians can be turned into mindless Titans, but 9 special Titans can be inherited, passed down through generations. I have 2 of them. And this power, Karth pressed, where did it originate? What was its source? Eren thought about the paths, about Ymir and her infinite prison, about the creature that had fused with her in that tree. How could he possibly explain any of that to these people? I don't know the full origin, he admitted, but I know it's biological. It's in our blood, our genes. It's not magic or whatever you call the warp. Magos Velt, could this be a form of genetic engineering? The tech priest's mechadendrites writhed in what might have been the equivalent of a shrug. Theoretically possible. The dark age of technology produced many wonders, some of which violated the cult Mechanicus's most sacred principles. However, Subject Yeager's genetic structure shows no signs of standard gene seed or other known modification patterns. If this is engineered, it predates Imperial records. Or, Psyker Lorraine spoke up, her voice taking on an eerie quality. He comes from beyond the Astronomican's light, from a place the Emperor's gaze does not reach. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Even Eren felt a chill at those words, though he didn't understand why they seemed so ominous. Explain, Karth commanded. When I read his surface thoughts, Lorraine continued, I sense no connection to the warp as we understand it, but there is something else. A network, a web of connections that span time itself, and at the center of it, something ancient and alien and profoundly sad. She was seeing the paths, Eren realized. Somehow, this Psyker woman was catching glimpses of the realm where all Eldians connected. He speaks truth when he says he doesn't know how he arrived here, Lorraine continued. But I sense that he was pulled, yanked from his reality into ours by a force beyond his comprehension. The trauma of it nearly shattered his mind. He survived only because his regenerative abilities extend to neural tissue. Can you determine his purpose? Karth asked. Was he sent here? Is he a weapon deployed against the Imperium? I cannot say. His mind is deeply guarded, not by training but by sheer force of will. He has looked into the eyes of death itself and not flinched. He has committed acts that would break most men, and he carries that weight like armor. Probing deeper would require breaking that armor, and I am not certain my own sanity would survive the attempt. Karth absorbed this information, his expression thoughtful. Eren Yeager, I am going to tell you something, and I want you to listen very carefully. The universe you find yourself in now, the galaxy as we call it, is not a kind place. It is an infinite war zone where humanity is beset on all sides by enemies that seek our extinction. Xenos races that see us as either prey or competition. Dark forces from the warp that seek to corrupt and destroy all that we have built. And our own kind, twisted by chaos or ambition or madness, who betray everything the Emperor fought to create. He stood pacing as he spoke, his robes swirling around him. The Imperium of man is the only thing standing between humanity and total annihilation. We control 1,000,000 worlds, field armies numbering in the billions, and wage war on a scale that would dwarf anything your world has ever seen. And yet, we are losing. Slowly, inevitably, we are being ground down by the sheer weight of the galaxy's hostility. He turned back to Eren, his augmented eye glowing brighter. Your power, if it is what you claim, could change that. A human who can transform into a giant warrior, who can regenerate from any wound, who can coordinate with others of his kind through some form of psychic network. Do you have any idea what the Imperium could do with that? We could create armies of Titan shifters. We could turn the tide of wars that have raged for centuries. We could save countless lives. By enslaving people like me, Eren said quietly, by forcing them to become weapons. By giving humanity a chance to survive, Karth corrected. Is that not worth some sacrifice? And there it was, the same argument Eren had heard his entire life, just dressed in different words. Sacrifice your freedom for the greater good. Submit to control because the alternative is death. Become a weapon because that's what humanity needs you to be. He'd heard it from the military police on parodies, from Zeke, from the Marlians who turned Eldians into mindless titans for a century. And now he was hearing it here in this impossible universe from people who claim to be humanity's protectors. No, Eren said, his voice hard. It's not worth it. I've spent my entire life fighting against people who thought like that. People who wanted to use me, control me, turn me into a tool for their vision of the greater good. And I'm not going to start agreeing with them now. Even if refusal means your death. I've accepted my death before. I'll do it again if I have to. Karth stared at him for a long moment. You truly mean that? Every word. Then you are either the bravest fool I've ever met, the Inquisitor said, or the most dangerous, and I haven't decided which yet. He gestured to the Space Marines. Take him back to his cell, but remove the warp null manacles. If he's going to be here a while, we should at least allow him some comfort. As the restraints clicked open and the manacles were removed, Eren felt the connection to his Titan power rush back like a wave. For just a moment, he considered transforming, fighting his way out, but he dismissed the thought immediately. He was on a ship, presumably in space. Even if he could kill everyone here, where would he go? No, he would wait, watch, learn, and when the opportunity came, he would take it. Eren Yeager, Karth called out as the Space Marines led him to the door. There is something you should know. The place we found you, that dead world, it was once home to 17 billion people. An entire hive world, one of the Imperium's most productive manufacturing centers. Do you know what happened to it? Eren looked back, saying nothing. It was invaded by Tyranids, Karth continued. A Xenos race that consumes all biological matter in its path. They stripped that world bare in less than 3 months, killed every man, woman, and child, absorbed their genetic material, and moved on. 17 billion lives, ended because the Imperium didn't have the forces to defend them properly. That is the reality of this galaxy, Eren. That is what happens when we don't have enough weapons, enough soldiers, enough sacrifice. And what happened to the people who survived? Eren asked. Karth's expression didn't change. There were no survivors. The Imperium's policy in the face of Tyranid invasion is clear, either victory or extermination. If we cannot save a world, we scour it clean to prevent the Xenos from gaining biomass. You murdered your own people. We saved the galaxy from a greater threat. There is a difference. No, Eren said softly, there really isn't. The door closed behind him, and he was led back through the corridors to his cell. This time, when they locked him in, there were no manacles, no restraints. Just Eren, alone in the darkness, with his thoughts and his rage and his growing understanding of what kind of universe he'd fallen into. A universe where 17 billion people could be deemed acceptable losses. A universe where freedom was considered a dangerous delusion. A universe that made his own world's horrors look almost quaint by comparison. And somewhere in that darkness, as Eren sat with his back against the cold metal wall, he made a promise to himself. The same promise he'd made 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different circumstances. He would fight, he would survive, and he would never ever let anyone take his freedom again. Not the Imperium, not these chaos gods the Psyker had hinted at, not fate itself. Outside his cell, in a chamber shielded by wards and prayers, Inquisitor Karth compiled his initial report to the Ordo Xenos. He marked it with the highest classification level, added 3 separate seals of authorization, and included a recommendation that Subject Yeager be studied further before any decision about his fate was made. But he also added a warning, one that would be transmitted to every Inquisitor in the sector. This subject possesses capabilities that could prove either invaluable or catastrophic to the Imperium. He speaks of freedom with the fervor of a fanatic, shows no fear of death, and demonstrates a will that may prove impossible to break. If he cannot be controlled, he must be destroyed before his ideology spreads. The Imperium has weathered many threats, but the most dangerous have always been those that challenge the foundations of our faith. Eren Yeager may be such a threat. He sent the report and sat back, exhausted. In 73 years of service, he had interrogated heretics and xenos, demons and renegades. He had stared into the abyss of chaos itself and emerged with his sanity intact. But something about Eren Yeager troubled him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't the power. He'd seen plenty of powerful beings. It was the conviction, the absolute certainty in the young man's voice when he spoke of freedom. In the Imperium, such certainty was either sainthood or heresy, and Inquisitor Karth had a terrible suspicion he knew which this was. 3 weeks. That's how long Eren had been aboard the ship. He'd counted the meal deliveries, tracked the patterns of activity outside his cell. 3 weeks of isolation, of watching the void slip pass through the small porthole they'd granted him, of trying to understand a universe that seemed designed to crush hope. They'd interrogated him 7 more times. Always the same questions, phrased different ways. Always Psyker Lorraine watching with those glowing eyes, confirming he believed what he said. Always Inquisitor Karth taking notes, compiling data, treating Eren like a particularly fascinating specimen under glass. But in the last few days, something had changed. The dreams had started. Not normal dreams. Eren had suffered nightmares since childhood, had grown accustomed to waking in cold sweats remembering his mother's death. But these were different. These felt like they came from outside him, like fingers pressing against his skull, trying to find cracks in his mental armor. He would see visions of impossible things, palaces made of writhing flesh, gardens where the flowers screamed, battlefields where the dead stood up and fought on both sides. And always in the background of these visions there was laughter, mad, ecstatic laughter that made his skin crawl. Sometimes he heard voices. Such delicious anger, one would whisper, its tone like grinding stone. Such beautiful rage. We could help you channel that, boy. Give you the strength to tear your enemies apart with your bare hands. Freedom, another would croon, its voice silk over broken glass. That's what you want, isn't it? True freedom, not the pathetic limitations of flesh and mortality. We can show you pleasures beyond imagination, experiences that would shatter your simple understanding of existence. Change, a third would giggle, the sound like wind chimes made of bones. You've already changed so much, little shifter, changed from human to titan, from victim to weapon. Why stop there? We can help you change further, evolve beyond what you ever imagined. And beneath them all, a fourth presence. This one didn't speak in words, but Eren felt it nonetheless. A vast, patient intelligence that watched and waited and planned with the cold precision of inevitability itself. Eren had learned to fight back by focusing on his memories. When the voices came, he would think of his friends, Mikasa, Armin, Jean, the others. He would remember why he'd fought, what he'd been fighting for. The voices would retreat, frustrated but not defeated, and he would wake gasping, covered in sweat that steamed in the cool air of his cell. He hadn't told the Inquisitor about the voices. Some instinct warned him that would be a mistake. These people already saw him as a threat, already had him locked up and studied like a lab rat. If they thought he was being corrupted by something they called chaos, they would kill him without hesitation. So he kept silent and fought his private war against the whispers in the dark. On the 23rd day of his captivity, everything changed. Eren woke to the sound of alarms. Not the gentle chimes that marked shift changes, but blaring klaxons that made his bones vibrate. Red light flooded his cell, and through the porthole, he saw the void itself seem to be churning, reality twisting in ways his eyes couldn't properly track. The voices in his head erupted in joy. "Oh, wonderful, they've found you. Our brothers and sisters have pierced the veil. Blood and skulls, the god of war hungers. Perfect, perfect. Everything changes, everything becomes beautiful." A massive impact shook the entire ship. Eren was thrown against the wall, barely catching himself. The lights flickered, and for a moment true darkness filled the cell. When the emergency lighting kicked back in, it was dimmer, more inconsistent. Through his door he heard shouting, those flat, augmented voices of the Space Marines, but now with a note of urgency he hadn't heard before. "All hands to battle stations. We are under attack. The Jeller fields have failed on decks 17 through 23. All personnel prepare for demonic incursion." Demonic incursion. Eren didn't know what that meant, but the terror in the voices, even the normally unflappable Space Marines, told him it was bad. Another impact, this one closer. And then, impossibly, Eren heard something that made his blood freeze. Laughter. Real laughter, not the phantom voices in his head. It echoed through the corridors, high and mad and utterly delighted. His cell door exploded inward. Not opened, exploded, torn apart by forces that left the metal twisted and melting. Steam filled the corridor beyond, but this steam was wrong. It was pink and smelled of copper and something else, something that made Eren's hindbrain scream danger. A figure stepped through the steam. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every particular. Its skin, if it could be called skin, was the color of fresh bruises, purple and pink and shifting between the two. It stood on digitigrade legs ending in claws, and its arms were too long, too slender, ending in hands that had too many fingers. Its face was a nightmare of inhuman beauty, androgynous and perfect in all the wrong ways, with eyes that were pits of swirling color and a smile full of needle teeth. "There you are," it purred, and its voice was both masculine and feminine, young and old, beautiful and horrible. "The anomaly, the little shifter who doesn't belong. Oh, you're even more delicious up close." Eren's hand went to his mouth automatically, but before he could bite down, the creature moved with impossible speed. It was across the cell in an instant, one claw-tipped hand gripping his wrist, holding it away from his face. Now, it chided, its breath somehow smelling of both roses and rot. "No transformations yet. My master wants to meet you first. And trust me, little morsel, you don't want to disappoint my master." "Get off me!" Eren drove his knee into the creature's midsection with all his strength. The impact should have broken ribs, folded the thing in half. Instead, it just laughed, and Eren felt his kneecap crack against something harder than bone. Such spirit, such defiance. "Oh, you're perfect. No wonder the Dark Prince is interested." It yanked Eren forward, and reality seemed to twist. The cell, the ship, everything blurred and ran like wet paint. Eren felt like he was being pulled through a tunnel of screaming colors and impossible geometries. His mind reeled, trying to make sense of input that violated every law of physics he'd ever known. And then, suddenly, he was somewhere else. The floor beneath him was not metal but something organic, pulsing with a heartbeat that wasn't his own. The air was thick with scents, perfume and decay, pleasure and pain, life and death all mixed together until they became indistinguishable. Walls rose around him, but they weren't solid. They shifted and breathed, covered in eyes and mouths and other organs he couldn't name. He was in the warp. He had to be. This was the chaos that everyone had spoken of with such fear and hatred. "Welcome," a voice spoke, and it was like honey and venom mixed together, "to the palace of pleasure unending. I am so very glad you could join us." Eren looked up and saw something that his mind tried desperately to reject. It was humanoid but stretched and elongated, beautiful and repulsive in equal measure. Its skin shifted through colors that shouldn't exist, and it wore nothing yet seemed clothed in shadow and light simultaneously. Claws extended from delicate hands, and its face was a mask of terrible perfection. One moment masculine, the next feminine, the next neither and both. Lesser creatures surrounded it, those same wrong-colored demons he'd seen in his cell, along with things that were even worse. Creatures that seemed to be made of exposed nerve endings, things that danced on legs that bent the wrong way, beings that defied description entirely. "I am Zarakian, Herald of Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Pleasure," the central figure announced with a bow that was somehow mocking. "And you, Eren Yeager, have caught the attention of my master. The youngest of the Chaos Gods, the Lord of Excess and Experience, wishes to know more about you." "I don't give a damn what your master wants," Eren snarled, forcing himself to his feet despite the way the organic floor squirmed beneath him. "Send me back, now." Laughter erupted from all the demons at once, a sound that made Eren's ears ring. Such boldness, such determination. You truly have no idea what you're dealing with, do you? Zarakian circled Eren like a predator examining prey. "Let me educate you, little shifter. You exist in a universe governed by 4 great powers, the gods of chaos. We are not gods as you might understand them. We are fundamental forces of reality itself, given consciousness and will. Khorne, god of war and blood. Nurgle, god of decay and despair. Tzinchi, god of change and schemes. And Slaanesh." The demon's form rippled with pleasure at the name. "Slaanesh, god of excess and perfection. Every sensation, every experience, every desire taken to its ultimate extreme, that is Slaanesh's domain. And you, with your pain and your rage and your desperate hunger for freedom, you have the potential for such exquisite excess." "I'm not interested." "Oh, but you are." Zarakian moved closer and Eren felt heat radiating from the demon's form. "You've tasted power, haven't you? The rush of transformation, the euphoria of battle, the satisfaction of crushing your enemies. You've pushed yourself beyond human limits, died and been reborn, experienced suffering that would shatter lesser minds. You are already walking the path to Slaanesh, whether you know it or not." "You're wrong." Eren met the demon's swirling eyes without flinching. "I didn't seek power for its own sake. I fought because I had to, because my people were enslaved, because humanity was trapped behind walls, because someone needed to be willing to get their hands dirty. And you enjoyed it." "No." "Liar." Zarakian's smile widened. "Oh, little morsel, my kind can taste lies. We are born from mortal emotions, fed by mortal experiences. And I can taste the truth in your soul. You did enjoy it. The moment when you first transformed, when you felt the Titan's power surge through you, that was ecstasy. The battles where you crushed soldiers beneath your feet, where you fought other shifters and emerged victorious, that was satisfaction beyond anything your mortal form could provide. And the rumbling." The demon leaned in close, its breath hot against Eren's face. "The rumbling when you commanded millions of colossal titans, when you felt the entire world shake beneath your power, that was transcendence. Don't lie to me, Eren Yeager. Don't lie to yourself. You are already touched by excess." Eren wanted to deny it, wanted to say that everything he'd done had been necessary, that he'd taken no pleasure in the destruction, that he was just doing what had to be done. But the demon was right. He had felt those things. In the heat of battle, in the moment of transformation, there had been a savage joy that he'd never admitted to anyone, not even himself. The power hadn't corrupted him. He'd never lost sight of his goals, but he'd be lying if he said he hadn't felt its appeal. "Doesn't matter," he said finally. "Whatever I felt, it doesn't change anything. I'm not going to serve you or your master or any of these chaos gods. I've had enough of gods trying to control me." "Control?" Zarakian laughed. "Oh, sweet little mortal. Slaanesh doesn't want to control you. The Dark Prince wants to free you, to show you experiences beyond your wildest imaginings, to unlock potential you didn't know you possessed. In the warp in Slaanesh's realm, you could be anything, experience everything, transcend the limitations of your flesh completely, and lose myself in the process. Is that truly such a terrible price? What is the self but a prison of identity, a limitation imposed by biology and circumstance? Slaanesh offers the ultimate freedom, freedom from yourself. That's not freedom. Eren's voice was hard as iron. That's just another kind of slavery. If I'm not myself anymore, if my choices aren't my own, then I'm just a puppet dancing on someone else's strings. I'd rather die. Zarakian studied him for a long moment, and for the first time the demon's smile faltered slightly. You truly mean that? How? Interesting. And disappointing. The Dark Prince will be most displeased. The demon waved one elongated hand, and the scene around them shifted. Eren found himself looking down at the ship, the Blood Raven's vessel where he'd been imprisoned. But something was wrong with it. Parts of the hull were torn open, and he could see figures fighting in the corridors. Space Marines in red armor battling against demons like the ones surrounding him, dying in explosions of gore and light. Your captors are losing their ship, Zarakian explained casually. My siblings in service to the other gods have joined this raid. Khorne's bloodletters, Nurgle's plague-bearers, Tzeentch's horrors, all have boarded the vessel. It will fall within the hour, and every soul aboard will either die or be claimed for chaos. Why are you telling me this? Because I am giving you a choice, Eren Yeager. A genuine choice, which is more mercy than you deserve for rejecting my master's offer. You can return to that ship and fight alongside your captors. Try to save the humans who imprisoned you. You will almost certainly die in the process. You are strong, but you are not strong enough to face a full demonic incursion alone. The demon's form rippled with amusement. Or you can stay here in the warp and let me show you what Slaanesh truly offers. I promise you the experiences would be memorable. And when the ship falls, I will return you to the Imperium elsewhere, free of the Imperium's chains. No prison, no interrogations, no inquisitors studying you like a lab animal. Just you, your powers, and an entire galaxy to explore. Eren looked at the dying ship, at the Space Marines being torn apart by demons, at Inquisitor Karth visible in one corridor, fighting back-to-back with Psyker Lorraine against a tide of horrors. Those people had imprisoned him, had treated him like a threat, a weapon to be studied and possibly destroyed. They represented everything he'd fought against: authority that demanded submission, power that crushed individual freedom, an empire built on the backs of countless sacrifices. Why should he save them? The answer came immediately, clear as crystal in his mind. Because it was the right thing to do. He didn't have to agree with the Imperium to recognize that the demons were worse. At least the Imperium, for all its faults, still valued human life enough to fight for it. These chaos things saw humanity as nothing more than playthings and prey. And more than that, Eren had never run from a fight when people needed help. It wasn't in his nature. It had never been in his nature. Send me back, he said. Are you certain? This is your last chance to. Send me back. Zarakian sighed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. Very well, but know this, Eren Yeager, you have been marked now. All four of the Chaos Gods have taken notice of you. Khorne sees your rage and bloodlust. Nurgle sees your endurance and acceptance of suffering. Tzeentch sees your schemes and the way fate bends around you. And Slaanesh sees your potential for greatness and excess. You cannot escape their attention now, no matter how far you run or how hard you fight. The demon raised one hand, and reality began to twist again. We will meet again, little shifter, and next time you may not have a choice about accepting our gifts. The last thing Eren saw before the warp released him was Zarakian's smile, knowing and patient and utterly terrifying. Then he was falling through that tunnel of screaming colors again, reality reasserting itself in waves of nausea and pain. He hit metal flooring hard, gasping, and looked up to find himself back on the ship. But the ship had become hell. Chapter 5. In the belly of chaos. Blood covered everything. Not just splattered across walls in the aftermath of violence, but actively flowing in rivers down the corridors, pooling in corners, dripping from the ceiling in thick, viscous curtains. Eren pushed himself to his feet and his hand slipped in the gore, sending him sprawling again. What the hell happened here? He was in a section of the ship he didn't recognize, somewhere deep, judging by the heavy pipes and conduits that lined the walls. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red, and the alarms were different now, more urgent, mixed with what sounded like prayers being broadcast over the ship's Vox system. A scream cut through the chaos, human, raw, full of terror and agony. Eren ran toward it without thinking, his feet pounding against the metal grating. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, what might have been a cargo bay once, and the scene that greeted him nearly made him retch. Demons, dozens of them, but these were different from Zarakian's court. These were things of rage and violence made manifest. They stood easily 9 feet tall, their skin the color of fresh blood, their bodies corded with muscle that looked like it had been flayed to expose the meat beneath. Each one wielded weapons that seemed to have grown from their bodies, axes and swords made of brass and bone, dripping with ichor that burned the air itself. And they were slaughtering the crew. Men and women in naval uniforms, servitors, even a few space marines in red armor. All were being torn apart by the blood demons with methodical brutality. Eren watched as one demon drove its axe through a space marine's power armor like it was paper, the blessed ceramite offering no more protection than flesh against whatever unholy force empowered that weapon. Blood for the blood god. The demons roared in unison. Skulls for the skull throne. Eren's hand was at his mouth before conscious thought caught up with instinct. His teeth broke skin and lightning split the air in that confined space. Thunder boomed and steam erupted as 15 meters of attack titan manifested in an explosion of light and power. The demons noticed. Every one of those brass faces turned toward Eren's titan form, and in their eyes, pits of red fire, he saw recognition. Not of who he was, but of what he represented. A challenge, a worthy kill, new prey. One bellowed, its voice like grinding stone. Khe will be pleased. They charged as one, a wave of brass and blood and hatred given form. Eren met them head-on. The first demon to reach him swung its axe in an arc that would have bisected the titan from shoulder to hip. Eren caught the weapon's haft, feeling the heat of it burn through the titan's flesh even as steam worked to repair the damage. He yanked hard, pulling the demon off balance and drove his other fist into its face. The impact should have crushed its skull, should have ended it instantly. Instead, the demon staggered back, shook its head, and laughed. Yes, strength, fury, more. They're not like humans, Eren realized with growing alarm. They don't die easily. The other demons piled onto him, hacking and slashing with their unholy weapons. Each blow carved chunks from the titan's flesh, and for the first time since inheriting the attack titan, Eren felt his regeneration struggling to keep pace with the damage. These weren't ordinary weapons, weren't even the blessed rounds the Sisters of Battle had used. These were artifacts of chaos itself, designed specifically to kill and cause suffering. But Eren had one advantage the demons didn't expect: experience. He'd fought the armored titan, whose hardening could turn aside any blade. He'd battled the Warhammer titan, whose crystalline structures could pierce any defense. He'd survived the jaws of the Warhammer titan and emerged victorious. These demons were powerful, but they fought with the straightforward brutality of beings that had never needed strategy. Eren used that against them. He grabbed one demon by its arm, spun, and hurled it into 3 of its fellows, sending all 4 crashing into the cargo bay's wall with enough force to crack the metal. Another demon came at him from the side, and Eren dropped, letting its axe swing through empty air where his titan's neck had been. He swept his leg out, caught the demon's ankles, and sent it sprawling. Before it could rise, he stomped down on its back, driving it into the floor with a sound like brass bells breaking. The demon dissolved into smoke and ichor, its form unable to maintain cohesion in the materium after such trauma. They can be killed, Eren realized. They're tough, but they can be killed. He pressed the advantage, his titan moving with the brutal efficiency of years of combat experience. He used the confined space to his advantage, forcing the demons to come at him in smaller numbers, preventing them from overwhelming him with sheer force. Each time one got close, he either crushed it with raw strength or tore it apart with his hands, ignoring the pain as their weapons carved into his flesh. Steam filled the chamber, mixing with the blood and creating a fog that reduced visibility to meters. The demons didn't seem bothered. They could probably sense him through means other than sight, but it gave Eren something to work with. He moved through the steam like a ghost, striking from unexpected angles, using the confusion to separate and eliminate targets. But there were so many of them. For every demon he destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear, and his stamina was fading. The transformation had already been pushed hard by his time in the warp. Whatever that place was, it had drained him in ways he didn't fully understand. Each regeneration came slower, each movement felt heavier. A demon's axe caught him in the side, driving deep, and Eren felt ribs crack and organs rupture. The pain was blinding, and for a moment his titan form staggered. The demons sensed weakness and piled on, their weapons rising and falling in a frenzy of violence. No, not like this. Not to these things. Eren roared, and the sound was pure defiance. He planted his feet, grabbed 2 demons by their heads, and slammed them together with enough force that their brass skulls shattered. He kicked another, sent it flying across the chamber to impact the far wall. Another tried to grapple him from behind, and he reached back, grabbed it, and tore it in half lengthwise. But there were still too many. And then, suddenly, there were less. A bolt round exploded against a demon's back, taking its head off in a spray of unholy ichor. Another round, another demon down. Eren's titan turned and saw space marines entering the cargo bay from a side corridor. A full squad of them, their armor scorched and bloodied but their weapons still firing. Leading them was Brother Sergeant Thaddeus, his armor's right pauldron cracked and hanging loose, but his storm bolter never wavering as it spat death into the demon horde. Suppressing fire, Thaddeus's voice boomed over the Vox. "Cover the Titan shifter, he's fighting on our side." The Space Marines formed a firing line and unleashed hell. Bolt rounds, each one blessed and sanctified, each one packed with explosives and prayers, tore into the demons with devastating effect. These were the angels of death, the Emperor's finest warriors, and even chaos itself gave pause before their righteous fury. Eren didn't waste the opportunity. With the demon's attention split between him and the Space Marines, he redoubled his efforts, crushing and tearing with renewed vigor. His titan's hands were slick with demon ichor. His body was more wounds than flesh, but he kept fighting. Together, the attack titan and the blood ravens, they pushed the demons back. It took 15 minutes of brutal combat, but eventually the last demon fell, its brass body dissolving into smoke and fading back into whatever hellish realm had spawned it. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of Eren's ragged breathing and the whir of the Space Marines' armor servos. Eren let the titan form collapse, steam erupting as the flesh evaporated around him. He dropped to his hands and knees, naked and gasping, every muscle screaming in protest. The floor beneath him was slick with blood and other fluids he didn't want to identify. Heavy footsteps approached. Eren looked up to see Brother Sergeant Thaddeus standing over him, storm bolter still raised, pointed directly at his head. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Thaddeus lowered his weapon. "You fought well," the Space Marine said, his artificially enhanced voice carrying what might have been approval. "For an abomination." Eren would have laughed if he'd had the energy. "Thanks, I think. The Inquisitor is still alive, trapped 3 decks above us with the remnants of the command staff. The warp entities have breached containment throughout most of the ship. Our chances of survival are..." He paused, as if performing complex calculations. "Minimal. So what's the plan?" "We fight our way to the command deck, extract the Inquisitor and any other survivors, and then scuttle the ship before the demonic corruption spreads further. The Imperium cannot allow a vessel this size to fall completely under chaos control. It would become a plague ship, spreading corruption to every system it visited." Eren pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. One of the Space Marines wordlessly handed him a torn piece of cloth, part of a uniform, and he wrapped it around his waist for some semblance of modesty. "How long do we have?" he asked. "The tech priests estimate the warp rifts will destabilize the ship's structural integrity within 2 hours. We have less time than that to complete the mission and reach the evacuation craft." Thaddeus's helmeted gaze fixed on Eren. "You are not required to come. You could remain here, wait for the end. No one would fault a prisoner for refusing to fight for his captors." Eren met that inhuman helm's gaze without flinching. "I told you before, I'm not letting anyone take my freedom, and I'm not letting anyone else die if I can help it. So yeah, I'm coming." For a long moment, Brother Sergeant Thaddeus simply stared at him. Then he nodded once, a gesture of something that might have been respect. "Very well, Eren Yeager, but understand this. If you show any sign of corruption, any hint of demonic influence, I will end you myself. My duty to the Emperor supersedes all other concerns." "Wouldn't expect anything else." Thaddeus gestured to one of his squad. "Brother Malachi, provide the prisoner with armor. We can't have him fighting naked. It would be unseemly." The Space Marine in question produced a spare set of scout armor from somewhere in his pack, lighter than the massive suits the full Marines wore, designed for normal humans who served as chapter serfs. It was still too large for Eren, designed for men who spent their lives in military training, but it would do. He pulled it on quickly, grateful for both the protection and the dignity it afforded. "One more thing," Thaddeus said, as Eren finished securing the armor. "The demons you fought, they were lesser demons of Khorne, the blood god. What you encountered in your cell was likely a demon of Slaanesh. The fact that you have drawn the attention of multiple chaos gods is troubling. Most mortals who catch the dark god's eyes don't survive long without falling to corruption. Most mortals don't have my experience with refusing to submit," Eren replied. "We shall see. Come. The Inquisitor awaits, and every minute we waste is another minute for the demons to spread." They moved out, the squad of Space Marines forming a protective formation with Eren in the center. As they navigated the blood-slicked corridors of the dying ship, Eren reflected on the surreal nature of his situation. Less than an hour ago, these same Space Marines would have killed him without hesitation if ordered. Now he was fighting alongside them, temporarily allied against a common enemy. "The enemy of my enemy," he thought grimly. "Though once we're out of here, we'll probably go right back to being enemies ourselves." Unless he could find a way to escape during the chaos. The ship shuddered around them, and somewhere in the distance, Eren heard screaming, human and otherwise. The demon incursion was spreading, turning the vessel into a floating nightmare, and they were heading straight into the heart of it. Eren brought his hand to his mouth, ready to bite at a moment's notice. Whatever waited ahead, he would face it the same way he'd faced every challenge since the day the colossal titan had kicked down Wall Maria's gate. With fury, with defiance, and with an unbreakable will to survive, the Imperium wanted to judge him. Chaos wanted to corrupt him. Fate itself seemed determined to grind him down. But Eren Yeager had never been good at accepting judgment, had never submitted to corruption, and had spent his entire life fighting against fate. He wasn't about to start changing now. Not even if it killed him, especially not if it killed him, because some things were worth dying for. And freedom, true freedom, not the twisted version chaos offered or the oppressive version the Imperium enforced, was one of them. The ship was dying around them. Eren could feel it in the way the floor tilted at wrong angles, in the groaning of tortured metal, in the screams that echoed from every direction. They'd been fighting their way toward the command deck for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Time lost meaning when every corridor might conceal horrors beyond imagination. They'd encountered more demons, not just the brass-skinned bloodletters of Khorne, but other things, worse things. Entities that seemed to be made of diseased flesh, bloated and rotting yet somehow still alive. These moved with grotesque slowness but radiated a palpable aura of despair that made even the Space Marines falter. Brother Malachi had been caught by one, a single touch of its plague-ridden claw piercing through his armor, and Eren had watched in horror as corruption spread across the ceramite like cancer. Thaddeus had put a bolt round through his brother's head without hesitation. "Better dead than fallen," was all he'd said before moving on. That had been 10 minutes ago, and the memory still burned in Eren's mind. The casual efficiency of it, the lack of ceremony. Just pragmatic execution and continued mission. He'd seen soldiers die before, had caused countless deaths himself, but something about the Space Marine's emotionless acceptance disturbed him in ways he couldn't articulate. Now they stood at a sealed bulkhead, the last barrier between them and the command deck. Warning lights flashed across its surface, and the metal itself seemed to pulse with barely contained energy. "It's sealed from the other side," Brother Arcturus reported, scanning the door with sensors built into his helmet. "Multiple blast doors, reinforced with emergency protocols. They're locked down completely." "Can you breach it?" Thaddeus asked. "With melta charges, yes, but it will take time and the noise will draw every demon in 3 decks. Then we work quickly." Thaddeus turned to Eren. Can your Titan form break through that door?" Eren studied the bulkhead. It was massive, at least 3 meters thick by his estimation, made of some material that looked far more advanced than anything from his world. "Maybe, but I'd need to transform, and in this corridor there's not much room. We don't have alternatives. The Inquisitor and what remains of the command staff are trapped on the other side. If we don't extract them soon, they'll either be overrun or die when the ship's warp core destabilizes." Eren nodded, already bringing his hand to his mouth. "Everyone back up, way back." The Space Marines retreated down the corridor, weapons raised and covering both directions. Eren waited until they were clear, then bit down hard on his thumb. Lightning split the confined space. The transformation was instantaneous, flesh and bone erupting from Eren's body in a controlled explosion of power. But the corridor was too narrow for a full 15-meter Titan. Eren kept the form smaller, only about 8 meters, compressed and condensed to fit the available space. The ceiling pressed against the Titan's back, and its shoulders scraped the walls, but it was enough. The Titan's massive fist drew back and slammed into the bulkhead. The impact rang like a church bell. Metal shrieked in protest, and Eren felt the shock of it vibrate through the Titan's bones. A dent appeared in the door, but it held. He hit it again, and again. Each blow drove deeper, the Titan's regenerating flesh absorbing the damage even as hardened knuckles pounded through reinforced steel. Steam filled the corridor, billowing around the confined Titan form, making it harder to see but also providing cover against any approaching threats. On the 5th blow, cracks appeared in the metal. On the 10th, the bulkhead began to buckle. And on the 15th strike, it finally gave way, tearing open with a screech of tortured metal that echoed through the entire deck. Eren let the Titan form dissolve, dropping back to human size as he stumbled through the opening. The Space Marines were already moving past him, weapons raised, securing the chamber beyond. What they found made even Eren's stomach turn. The command deck had become an abattoir. Bodies lay everywhere, crew members, tech priests, even a few Space Marines in different chapter colors who must have been visiting when the attack began. But these weren't clean deaths from demon weapons. These people had been torn apart from the inside, their bodies ruptured as if something had burst out of them like grotesque flowers. And in the center of the carnage stood Inquisitor Karth, but he was not alone. Psyker Lorraine hung suspended in the air beside him, her body wreathed in crackling psychic energy, her eyes blazing with light so intense it hurt to look at. She was screaming, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her soul. And around them both, reality itself was tearing. The warp rift wasn't large, maybe 2 meters across, but through it, Eren could see things. Impossible vistas of twisted landscape, skies that burned with colors that shouldn't exist, shapes moving in the distance that his mind refused to properly process. Demons were pouring through, but these weren't the brutish bloodletters or the diseased plague bearers. These were creatures of pure chaos, constantly shifting between forms, their bodies flickering between states of matter like candle flames. Horror's brother Arcturus would later tell him they were called the demons of Tzinch, the chaos god of change. Inquisitor Karth was fighting them with weapons Eren hadn't seen before. His pistol spat not bullets but beams of pure light that burned through demonic flesh like acid. His other hand wielded some kind of force sword, its blade surrounded by a corona of psychic energy that left afterimages in the air. He moved with surprising speed for someone his age, cutting down demons with practiced efficiency. But he was losing. For every demon he killed, 2 more poured through the rift. And Psyker Lorraine, she was the anchor point, Eren realized. The rift was forming around her, using her psychic power as a gateway. If she couldn't close it, they were all dead. Lorraine. Karth shouted over the chaos. You must sever the connection. Let it go before it consumes you. I can't. She gasped, blood streaming from her nose, her ears, her eyes. Too strong, they're pulling me in. A horror lunged at the Inquisitor from the side. Before it could strike, a bolt round took it in what passed for a head, obliterating it in a spray of impossible colors. For the Emperor, Brother Sergeant Thaddeus roared, his squad opening fire as they charged into the command deck. Brothers form a perimeter around the Inquisitor. Nothing gets through. The Space Marines moved with perfect coordination, their decades or even centuries of combat experience evident in every motion. They formed a living wall between the rift and the rest of the command deck, their bolters singing a hymn of death as they cut down demon after demon. But the rift was growing. Eren could see it expanding, reality stretching and tearing like wet paper. In moments, it would be large enough for something bigger to come through. Something worse than the lesser demons they'd been fighting. He needed to do something, but what? He couldn't shoot psychic energy, couldn't close warp rifts, could barely understand what the hell was even happening. Think like you did against the Warhammer, like you did in Liberio. What's the objective? The rift was centered on Lorraine. She was the anchor. If he could break her connection to it somehow, knock her unconscious or disrupt her concentration. But she was surrounded by demons and space marines and the Inquisitor himself. Getting close would be suicide. Unless... Eren's eyes fixed on a column near the rift, one of the structural supports that held up this section of the ship. It was damaged, already stressed from the demon attack and the general deterioration of the vessel. If he could collapse it, bring it down on the right angle. He transformed again, smaller this time, only 5 meters, just enough strength for what he needed. The Titan form manifested in a corner of the command deck, away from the main fighting, and immediately lunged for the damaged column. What is he doing? One of the Space Marines shouted. Thaddeus understood immediately. Everyone brace. He's bringing down the ceiling. The Titan's hands wrapped around the column and pulled with all its strength. Metal shrieked. Bolts popped free. And with a groan that seemed to come from the ship's very soul, the column gave way. The ceiling above the rift collapsed. Tons of reinforced metal and machinery crashed down, not on the rift itself. Nothing material could affect it, but on Psyker Lorraine. Inquisitor Karth saw it coming and threw himself to the side, rolling clear with reflexes that belied his age. Lorraine, locked in her psychic struggle, couldn't dodge. The debris hit her, and her concentration shattered. The psychic scream that erupted from her was like nothing Eren had ever heard. It wasn't sound. It was something that bypassed his ears entirely and stabbed directly into his brain. Every person in the command deck, Space Marines included, dropped to their knees clutching their heads, and the rift imploded. It didn't close gradually or fade away. It collapsed in on itself like a star going nova in reverse, sucking in everything near it with irresistible force. Demons were yanked back into the warp, their forms dissolving as reality reasserted itself. The air itself seemed to scream as the fundamental laws of physics fought to heal the wound in space-time. Then, silence. Eren let the Titan form dissolve and staggered, his head ringing from the psychic backlash. Around him, the Space Marines were recovering, checking their armor's integrity, confirming their weapons were still functional. Inquisitor Karth pulled himself up using a console for support, blood trickling from one ear. And beneath the rubble where Lorraine had stood, nothing moved. Is she? Eren started to ask. Dead, Karth confirmed, his voice flat. The psychic trauma alone would have killed her, even if the impact didn't. She was brave, held off a demonic incursion for 17 minutes against impossible odds. The Emperor will welcome her soul. He said it with the same lack of emotion Thaddeus had shown when executing his corrupted brother. Just stating facts, acknowledging sacrifice, moving on. These people, Eren thought with a chill. They're so used to death they don't even mourn anymore. Status report, Thaddeus demanded, his helm sweeping the room. Command staff is dead, one of his brothers reported. Ship's captain, the navigator, most of the senior officers, all killed in the initial demonic assault. The warp core. Destabilizing rapidly. We have perhaps 30 minutes before catastrophic failure. Then we proceed to the evacuation craft immediately. Thaddeus turned to Karth. Inquisitor, can you walk? I can run if necessary, Sergeant. Let's move. They made for the exit, picking their way through the carnage. As they passed Lorraine's body, or what was left of it beneath the rubble, Eren paused. He didn't know this woman. She'd interrogated him, invaded his mind, but she'd also fought and died to protect the ship. Come on, Arcturus said, not unkindly. The dead are beyond our help now. The living need us. Eren nodded and followed. The route to the evacuation bay was mercifully clear. Most of the demons had been drawn to the command deck by the psychic energy of the rift. They encountered only scattered resistance, a few lingering horrors that the Space Marines dispatched with clinical efficiency. The bay itself was intact, protected by reinforced bulkheads and what Arcturus explained were Gellar field generators, technology that somehow kept the warp at bay. Two ships waited there, a Space Marine Thunderhawk and a smaller inquisitorial shuttle. We'll take the Thunderhawk, Thaddeus decided. It's better armed and more likely to survive if we encounter hostiles during extraction. They boarded quickly, the Space Marines moving with practiced efficiency to their stations. Eren found himself strapped into a seat designed for someone in power armor, the restraints loose around his smaller frame. Across from him, Inquisitor Karth was conferring quietly with Thaddeus, their voices too low to hear over the ship's engines roaring to life. The Thunderhawk launched with brutal acceleration that would have killed an unaugmented human. Eren's vision grayed at the edges, his body struggling to cope with forces it wasn't designed to handle. Then they were clear, the bay doors shrinking behind them as the Thunderhawk burned hard away from the dying ship. Through a viewport, Eren watched the vessel they just escaped. It looked even worse from outside. Whole sections were torn open, atmosphere venting in frozen plumes, fires burning in the void where they shouldn't be able to exist. And as he watched, something massive began to tear its way out of the hull near the engines. It was a demon, but calling it that seemed inadequate. This thing was the size of a building, all brass and chains and rage made manifest. A greater demon of Khorne, though Eren wouldn't learn that name until later. It roared, a sound that somehow carried through the vacuum and raised a weapon the size of a tank. Warp core failure imminent, the Thunderhawk's pilot announced calmly. Brace for shock wave. The ship exploded. Not a normal explosion. Eren had seen enough of those to know the difference. This was reality itself breaking down, the material universe and the warp colliding in a brief, terrible instant. Light and darkness merged. Space and time twisted. And the demon, caught in the epicenter of the blast, was torn back into the warp with a scream that Eren felt in his bones. The shock wave hit their Thunderhawk like a physical blow, sending it tumbling. Alarms blared. The pilot fought for control, servos whining as thrusters fired in complex patterns to stabilize their spin. They emerged from the chaos still intact, still alive, flying through debris that had once been a ship and the souls of everyone aboard. Set course for the nearest Imperial world, Thaddeus ordered. We need to get the Inquisitor to safety and file a full report on what happened here. And him, Arcturus asked, gesturing at Eren, the prisoner. All eyes turned toward Eren. He met their gaze steadily, waiting to see if they would honor the temporary alliance or return to seeing him as a threat now that the immediate danger had passed. Inquisitor Karth spoke first. He saved my life. Saved all our lives with that maneuver in the command deck. I'm not inclined to throw him back in chains immediately after that. He also drew the demon's attention in the first place, Arcturus pointed out. The incursion began right after we captured him. That's not coincidence. No, Karth agreed. It's not. The Chaos Gods have taken an interest in Eren Yeager, and that makes him either a valuable asset or an existential threat. He fixed Eren with his augmented gaze. The question is, which one are you? Neither, Eren said. I don't serve Chaos and I won't serve the Imperium either. I just want to survive and find my way home, if that's even possible. Home, Karth mused, to a world that may not even exist in this reality. You understand that you're truly stranded here, that there may be no going back. Eren had been trying not to think about that, but hearing it said aloud made it impossible to ignore. Mikasa, Armin, Historia, everyone he'd left behind, everyone he'd been fighting for, they might as well be on the other side of the universe. They might as well be dead for all the chance he had of ever seeing them again. The weight of that realization threatened to crush him. Then I'll find a new purpose, he said, forcing strength into his voice he didn't feel. I'll keep fighting, keep surviving. It's all I know how to do. Thaddeus and Karth exchanged glances. Some wordless communication passed between them, too fast and subtle for Eren to interpret. Very well, Karth said finally. Here is what I propose, Eren Yeager. When we reach an Imperial world, you will not be imprisoned. Instead, you will be observed, allowed to move relatively freely but under constant surveillance. You will learn about this galaxy, about the threats we face, about why the Imperium exists as it does. And we will learn about you, about your powers, your limitations, your true nature. And if I refuse, then you will be executed as a potential chaos-tainted threat. Those are your options, cooperation or death, choose. It wasn't really a choice at all. But then, Eren had learned long ago that few choices in life were genuine. The illusion of choice was just another form of control. Fine, he said. I'll cooperate for now. I expected no less. Karth leaned back in his seat, suddenly looking very old and very tired. Sergeant Thaddeus, how long until we reach a safe port? 3 days at maximum acceleration. We'll make for Cronus. It's the nearest world with both Astartes and inquisitorial facilities. Cronus? Karth nodded slowly. Yes, that will do. It's a war zone, but then everywhere is a war zone these days. He closed his eyes. Wake me when we arrive. I need to meditate on what I've witnessed and decide how to report it to my superiors. The Thunderhawk settled into a steady course, its engines thrumming with power as it carried them through the void toward their destination. Around Eren, the Space Marines went about their duties with mechanical efficiency, checking weapons, performing maintenance on their armor, muttering prayers to their emperor. And Eren sat alone with his thoughts, processing everything that had happened. He'd been in this universe for less than a month, and already he'd fought demons, nearly been corrupted by chaos, saved an Inquisitor's life, and watched a ship full of people die. The scale of violence here, the casual acceptance of death and sacrifice, it was overwhelming even for someone who'd lived through the horrors of his own world. But what disturbed him most was how quickly he was adapting. When Thaddeus had executed his corrupted brother, Eren's first reaction hadn't been horror, it had been understanding. The logic was sound. Corruption couldn't be allowed to spread. One death to prevent many. It was the same logic that had driven his own actions during the rumbling. Was he becoming like them? These Space Marines, with their fanatical devotion, their acceptance of any sacrifice in service to their emperor, was this galaxy changing him, or was it simply revealing what he'd always been capable of? No, he thought firmly, I'm not them. I fight for freedom, not for some god emperor I've never met. I make my own choices, not follow orders blindly. But even as he thought it, he knew the distinction was getting harder to maintain. In his exhaustion, Eren's eyes drifted closed. Sleep claimed him quickly, dragging him down into dreams that were, for once, mercifully free of whispers and visions. He didn't know that as he slept, Inquisitor Karth was composing a report that would reach the highest levels of the Inquisition. A report that would label Eren Yeager as Subject Omega, a potential weapon of immense value or a threat of catastrophic proportions. He didn't know that in the warp, 4 great powers watched his sleeping form through the eyes of their servants and smiled with anticipation. He didn't know that on the world of Cronus, a war was raging that would make everything he'd experienced so far seem like a prelude. And he didn't know that his arrival there would change the course of that war and possibly the fate of the entire sector. All he knew in his dreams was that he was still alive, still fighting, still free after a fashion. And for Eren Yeager, that would have to be enough, for now. The Thunderhawk broke atmosphere over Cronus 3 days later, and Eren got his first real look at an Imperial world. It was dying. From orbit, the planet should have been beautiful, blue oceans, green continents, white clouds, but Cronus was covered in scars. Vast stretches of land had been burned to ash, leaving black wounds that were visible even from space. Cities, or what had once been cities, lay in ruins, their structures toppled and broken. And everywhere there was war. What happened here? Eren asked, pressing his face against the viewport. Brother Arcturus, who'd been assigned as his constant companion for the journey, gestured at the devastation below. Cronus is a war world. It has been contested for centuries, changing hands between the Imperium, the forces of chaos, and various Xenos races. Currently, it is under assault by a green-skinned WAAGH, an orc invasion force numbering in the millions. Orcs, Xenos, savage, brutal, and utterly dedicated to warfare. They are perhaps the most numerous species in the galaxy, and certainly one of the most destructive. On Cronus, they have overrun approximately 40% of the planet's surface. The Blood Ravens maintain a fortress monastery here, and we have been holding them back for 6 months, but their numbers continue to grow. As the Thunderhawk descended, Eren could make out more details. Armies clashing across plains, explosions that lit up entire horizons, structures that must have been weapons of impossible scale, cannons the size of buildings, walkers taller than any Titan he'd ever seen, flying machines that darkened the sky. And the bodies. Even from this altitude, he could see the dead carpeting the battlefields in such numbers that they formed hills and valleys of their own. Millions fighting, Eren murmured. Millions dying. Welcome to the 41st Millennium, Inquisitor Karth said from behind him. The old man had recovered somewhat during the journey, though he still looked haggard. This is the reality of our galaxy. Endless war on a scale that consumes worlds. Cronus is one battle among 10,000 currently raging across the Imperium. And it is far from the worst. The Thunderhawk banked toward a massive fortress that dominated an entire mountain range. It was built in the same Gothic style as everything else Eren had seen, all spires and buttresses, covered in symbols and scripture, designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Gun emplacements dotted every surface, and as they approached, Eren saw hundreds of figures moving along the walls, all in that same blood-red armor. The fortress monastery of the Blood Ravens, Thaddeus announced. Our chapter's home on this world. It has never fallen, not in 300 years of warfare. It will not fall today. They landed on a platform large enough to hold a dozen Thunderhawks. As the boarding ramp lowered, Eren was hit by the smell, smoke, and cordite and something else, something organic and foul that made his stomach turn. The greenskins, Arcturus explained, seeing his reaction. They have a distinctive odor. You'll grow accustomed to it. Eren doubted that but said nothing. A welcoming party waited at the base of the ramp. More space marines, but these were different from the ones he traveled with. These wore more ornate armor, decorated with honors and accolades, and they carried themselves with an authority that went beyond mere military rank. At their head stood a figure who could only be the chapter master. He was massive even by space marine standards, easily 9 feet tall in his ancient suit of artificer armor. His face was scarred and weathered, showing centuries of warfare, and his eyes were the cold blue of deep ice. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute command. "Brother Sergeant Thaddeus, report." "Chapter Master Angelos," Thaddeus saluted. "We have returned from our mission to investigate the warp disturbance in the Tertius system. The disturbance's source was this individual," he gestured to Eren, "who appears to be a human from beyond Imperial space with abilities we do not fully understand. Inquisitor Karth has taken custody of him and will explain further." Gabriel Angelos, for that was the chapter master's name, turned his gaze on Eren. It was like being studied by a predator, evaluated for threat level and potential use in the space of a heartbeat. "A human who draws the attention of the warp," Angelos said. "How novel, and how concerning. Inquisitor Karth, you believe this individual is not a chaos cultist?" "I believe he is something else entirely," Karth replied, stepping forward. "Something unprecedented. I have filed my preliminary report, but the full implications will take time to understand. In the meantime, I request quarters for myself and the subject, as well as access to your librarium. There are texts I need to consult." "Granted, but know this, Inquisitor. If your subject proves to be a threat to my chapter or this world, I will not hesitate to eliminate him. We have enough enemies without adding more." "Understood, Chapter Master. I would expect nothing less." Angelos nodded curtly and turned to bark orders at his subordinates. Within moments, Eren found himself being escorted deeper into the fortress, through corridors that seemed to go on forever, past chambers filled with weapons and armor and machines whose purposes he could only guess at. They gave him a cell, though they called it quarters this time. It was small but functional, with an actual bed instead of cold metal floor, and a viewport that looked out over the battlefield below. He could see the war raging in the distance, flashes of light and pillars of smoke marking where armies clashed. "You will remain here until the Inquisitor summons you," Arcturus informed him. "Food will be brought at regular intervals. Do not attempt to leave without escort. The fortress is vast, and there are many areas where you would not be welcome." "Prisoners of war?" Eren asked. "Armories, tech shrines, the reclusium where our chaplains minister to the fallen, and the librarium where our psychers train. Any of those places would likely result in your death if you wandered into them alone." "Got it, stay put." Arcturus paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Yeager, you fought well aboard the ship. You did not have to help us, yet you did. That counts for something, even if you are not one of the Emperor's chosen." Then he was gone, the door sealing behind him with a hiss of hydraulics. Eren stood alone in his quarters and finally allowed himself to process everything. He was on an alien world, surrounded by post-human warriors who could kill him without effort, in the middle of a war that dwarfed anything from his own reality. He had no allies, no resources, no plan, but he was alive, and where there was life, there was hope. There was a chance to learn, to adapt, to find some way to survive in this nightmare universe. He moved to the viewport and stared out at the distant battle. Somewhere out there, millions of beings were killing each other for reasons that probably made sense to them. Territory, resources, ideology, simple survival. The details might be different from his own world's conflicts, but the fundamental nature was the same. War. Endless, grinding, consuming war. Is this all there is? He wondered. In every reality, every universe. Just different flavors of the same hell. Before he could pursue that depressing thought further, alarms began to blare. Not the general alert he'd heard on the ship, but something different. A deep, resonant tone that seemed to shake the fortress itself. Through the viewport, Eren saw activity explode across the walls. Space Marines were running to their positions. Massive guns were swiveling to target something, and in the sky. In the sky, something was falling. No, not falling, descending under power. It was a ship, but like nothing Eren had seen before. It was massive, crude, all angles and armor plates welded together in a design that looked more like it had been assembled from scrap than engineered. Smoke poured from its engines, and as Eren watched, it opened fire on the fortress with weapons that tore great chunks from the walls. "Orc attack ship," a voice said from behind him. Eren spun to find Inquisitor Karth had entered his quarters. The old man looked grim. "They're launching an assault on the fortress itself. This is unusual. The Greenskins typically prefer ground battles to void combat. Something has stirred them up." "Are we in danger?" "Constantly, but this is a space marine fortress. It would take an army to breach it." Karth paused, then smiled without humor. "Fortunately for the orcs, they have an army." Through the viewport, Eren watched as the orc ship slammed into the fortress's outer walls with the force of a meteor. The impact shook the entire structure, and Eren had to grab the wall to stay on his feet. When he looked again, he saw the ship had embedded itself in the wall like a massive splinter, and its sides were opening, ramps dropping. And the orcs came. They poured out in a green tide, thousands of them, each one larger than a human, all muscle and tusks and crude weapons. They roared as they charged, a sound that even through meters of stone and steel made Eren's hair stand on end. It was the sound of pure, mindless aggression of creatures that lived only to fight and cared nothing for their own survival. The blood ravens met them with bolter fire and blade. Eren watched space marines leap from the walls to engage the orcs in close combat, their power swords carving through green flesh, their fists smashing through crude armor. But the orcs kept coming, wave after wave, and even from here, Eren could see that the defenders were being pushed back. "We need to evacuate this section," Karth said. "The fighting will reach the inner fortress within the hour. Come." But Eren wasn't listening. He was watching the battle, seeing the tactics, the flow of combat. The Space Marines were better trained, better equipped, individually superior in every way. But they were outnumbered at least 100 to 1, and the orcs' sheer momentum was overwhelming them. They need a shock, something to break the orcs' advance and give the defenders time to regroup. "Where are you going?" Karth demanded as Eren moved toward the door. "To help." "You'll be killed. You're not equipped for this kind of warfare." Eren looked back at the Inquisitor, and something in his expression made the old man fall silent. "I've fought wars before," Eren said quietly. "I know what I'm doing." He was out the door before Karth could protest further, running through the corridors toward the sound of battle. Space Marines shouted at him to halt, to get back, but Eren ignored them. He could feel it now, that old familiar sensation, the call to violence that he'd tried so hard to suppress after the rumbling but never quite succeeded in killing. The orcs wanted war. He'd give them war. He emerged onto a battleground that had been a courtyard minutes before. Now it was hell. Orcs and Space Marines fought in a swirling melee bolter fire mixed with the roar of crude orc guns. Power weapons clashed against massive cleavers. Blood, both red and green, covered everything. An orc saw Eren emerge from the corridor, a human small and weak compared to these giants, and charged with a bellow of delight. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall, all muscle and green skin and yellow tusks. In its hands, it carried what looked like a sword made from the blade of a chainsaw, roaring and spitting oil. Eren brought his hand to his mouth and bit down. Lightning split the courtyard. The transformation was instantaneous and massive. Eren manifested the attack Titan at full size, 15 meters of muscle and fury erupting from his human form in a blast of steam and power. The orc that had been charging him was sent flying by the sheer displacement of air. Every fighter in the courtyard, orc and Space Marine alike, froze, staring up at the Titan that had appeared in their midst. Then Eren moved. The Titan's hand swept out and grabbed a cluster of orcs, lifting them into the air. They struggled and roared, but the Titan's grip was unbreakable. Eren slammed them into the ground with enough force to leave a crater, green bodies pulping under the impact. Another orc charged, this one even larger, wearing crude armor made from scrap metal and wielding a gun that was more cannon than rifle. It opened fire, the rounds tearing chunks from the Titan's chest. Steam erupted as the wounds began to heal, and Eren's Titan form charged forward, covering the distance in 2 massive strides. The Titan's foot came down on the Orc leader like a hammer. The Greenskins roared in fury and turned their attention from the Space Marines to this new threat. Dozens of them swarmed toward Eren's Titan, firing their crude weapons, swinging their brutal melee tools. The Titan waded into them like a man walking through tall grass, each step crushing bodies, each swing of its arms sending orcs flying. But there were so many, and even the Titan's regeneration was struggling to keep up with the damage. Orc weapons might be crude, but they were devastatingly powerful bullets the size of Eren's fist, blades that could cleave through stone, explosives that tore craters in the courtyard. A massive rocket hit the Titan's back, and Eren felt the spine crack. His vision blurred as the Titan's form struggled to repair catastrophic damage. He was losing cohesion, the transformation eating through his stamina faster than he'd anticipated. Need to fall back, regroup. But before he could disengage, something even larger entered the courtyard. It was an orc, but calling it that was like calling a colossal Titan just another Titan. This thing stood nearly as tall as Eren's Titan form, its body a mass of muscle that had been augmented with crude mechanical parts. One arm had been entirely replaced with what looked like a massive claw made from a vehicle's manipulator. The other held a weapon that was part axe, part chainsaw, part power generator, a monstrosity of a blade that crackled with barely contained energy. And it wore armor, not the scrap metal of the regular orcs, but actual armor, thick plates of steel covered in glyphs and trophies. Skulls, human and otherwise, hung from chains around its neck. This was a war boss. A leader of the orc horde, a creature of such violence and power that it had clawed its way to dominance over millions of its kind. It saw Eren's Titan and grinned, showing a mouth full of metal teeth. Finally, it roared in a voice like grinding metal, a PROPPA fight. The warboss charged, and when it hit Eren's Titan, the impact was like 2 trains colliding. Both forms staggered, trading blows that shook the fortress. The warboss's claw closed around the Titan's arm, and Eren felt bones crack. He swung his other fist into the orc's head, but its skull was reinforced with metal plates, and the impact barely fazed it. The power claw came up and tore into the Titan's chest, ripping through flesh and steam. Eren screamed, both in the Titan and in his human body within the nape, as the claw dug deeper, searching for the weak point by pure instinct. It's going to kill me. This thing is going to. Bolter fire erupted from every direction. The Space Marines, having rallied while Eren drew the orc's attention, were counterattacking with coordinated fury. Dozens of them focused their fire on the warboss, explosive rounds detonating against its armor, chipping away at its defenses. The warboss roared in frustration, pulling its claw free from Eren's Titan to swat at these new irritants. That moment of distraction was all Eren needed. His Titan's jaws opened wide and clamped down on the warboss's shoulder, teeth sinking into green flesh and metal alike. The orc bellowed in pain and rage, driving its massive axe into the Titan's side. The blade carved deep, nearly cutting the Titan in half, but Eren's jaws didn't release. He bit down harder, tasting blood that was hot and acidic, feeling something vital tear in the orc's body. They fell together, Titan and warboss, crashing to the courtyard floor in a tangle of limbs and steam. Eren's vision was fading, the Titan form breaking down from accumulated damage. He couldn't hold it much longer, but neither could the warboss hold on to life. The creature's struggles grew weaker. Its roar became a gurgle, and finally it went still, the light fading from its red eyes. Eren released the transformation, dropping from the dissolving Titan into a pool of mixed blood. He hit the ground hard, naked and gasping, every muscle screaming in protest. Around him, the remaining orcs were being systematically executed by the Space Marines, their leader's death having broken their momentum. Heavy footsteps approached. Eren looked up to see Chapter Master Gabriel Angelos standing over him, his armor spattered with green blood, a power sword still crackling in his hand. "You," the Chapter Master said, are either the bravest fool I've ever encountered or the most dangerous asset to fall into our laps in decades. He looked at the dead war boss, then back at Eren. You killed Warlord Grimtusk. That creature has been besieging this fortress for 3 months and you killed it in single combat. Wasn't single combat. Eren managed to gasp out. You all helped. A fact which makes your survival even more remarkable. Angelos gestured, and one of his marines came forward with a cloak, draping it over Eren's exposed form. Rest, Eren Yeager. We will speak more when you have recovered. But know this, you have earned a debt from the blood ravens this day. We do not forget those who bleed alongside us. Eren wanted to respond, wanted to say something about not doing it for them, about just wanting to help. But consciousness was slipping away, his body finally giving in to exhaustion and trauma. His last thought before darkness claimed him was bitter amusement at the irony. He'd crossed universes, fought demons and space marines and orcs, all to end up in exactly the same position he'd been in on Parades. A weapon that powerful people wanted to use. Some things, it seemed, were constant across all realities.